Welcome to Black Skin, White Fatigues, about critiquing historical and current recruitment into imperialist or colonial armies. And we're focusing on the problematic, or problematizing I should say, the recruitment of black and Asian people into the British and French armies in particular, in contemporary wise, and more historically, again we'll be talking about the recruitment of Asian and African people into the French and British army. But I just wanted to say just a few words by way of introduction. Perhaps there's no even need for this meeting because, of course, Jeremy Corbyn and Owen Jones and the rest of them are going to turn the Labour Party into a revolutionary socialist organisation, overthrow British imperialism, and with the job is done and there's no reason for us to gather anymore like this. Or perhaps not. And perhaps actually imperialism is becoming more sophisticated, but in that sophistication, it has to become more sophisticated because it's in growing and deeper crisis as a result not only of its inherent and internal contradictions, particularly economic, but also political. And the political crisis that impacts imperialism is only a result of historical and current resistance of the people who are primarily impacted by British and Western imperialism in general, which is mostly the people of the so-called Third World. And the reason why what I'm saying ties in directly into the subject of the meeting is this, that in 2010 I shared with Marika recently an article, I think it was in the Daily Mail, whereby sections of the British state are discussing forming a new regiment of the British Army just for Punjabi Sikhs. And what we still have an open recruitment of one particular colonial or ex-colonial people directly into the British Army. That's the recruitment of Nepali people, or what is called the Gurkha regiment, which is a regiment of South Asian people from Nepal. And Roshan on the platform will be focusing in on that. Due to some technical difficulties, we won't be having the comrade from Nepal Skyping in, who's a central committee member of the United Communist Party of Nepal Maoist, who made a statement, but I've got the statement here, which I'll read out shortly. So just to sum up this, before I ask the speakers to come in, there's three main things we're focusing on. Historically, the treatment, or I should say the mistreatment of colonial people in the British and French army in the First World War and the Second World War. And just to give an example from the land in which I was born, I came to this windswept island off the coast of northwest Europe in 1981 at the age of 4. I was born in Chandigarh in Punjab. And the role that Punjabis have played vis-a-vis imperialism and colonialism is very interesting and literally violently contradictory. On the one hand, we contributed many great freedom fighters to the cause of liberation of our land and people from the so-called British Raj, including, I probably don't have to tell many people about these names and what they did and their legacies. But Shahid Udham Singh, who was arrested after he shot Michael Dwyer, who was responsible for the Amritsar massacre. Shahid Udham Singh assassinated Dwyer in Caxton Hall in London, I think it was in 1940, for which he was arrested. There was some ridiculous show trial and he was executed by hanging. In so doing, they made Shahid, which means martyr in many Middle Eastern and Asian languages, they made Shahid Udham Singh a great freedom fighter that inspired millions of youth, not only in the subcontinent, but throughout the world as well, and most definitely the Irish comrades and freedom fighters, with which the people of the subcontinent have a great affinity with, because coincidentally, when the British colonized the world, what they did in so doing, not directly, was to unite us closer together in a common cause of liberation. And of course the Punjabi people gave another son who was executed at the age only of 23, and I still can't believe he was 23 when he was disgustingly executed by the British in 1931. That's Shahid Azam Bhagat Singh. And the reason I emphasize Azam, it means the martyr above all others. Shahid Udham Singh was a Punjabi nationalist who was inspired by anarchism and the Russian Revolution, etc. An amazing, amazing genius, revolutionary mind, a strategical and tactical revolutionary, which I encourage everyone to read his life and his writings, etc. He's our equivalent of Che Guevara. Yes, madam?
Who's the statue of the man outside the Indian Embassy?
I can't think off the top of my head. Does anyone know who that is? But we'll come to that later in the discussion. But the other violent contradictory, the negative, do you know, madam, sorry?
No, I was asking you.
All right, okay. The other side to the contradiction is this, that the British, very kindly for us Punjabi people, defined us as a quote-unquote martial race. This was just a racist, a white supremacist notion to perhaps emotionally flatter us, to make us think that, oh, we're a martial race, oh, we should go and serve the British, etc. The Punjabis were recruited by the British. By the way, the Amritsar massacre was conducted by the British Army, but was actually delivered, the massacre, by a Gurkha regiment. The most infamous massacre in Punjab under the British. So the British recruited the Punjabis to go and kill Chinese people. My son was reading a book I gave him. It's a graphic novel called Boxers and Saints. It's an amazing graphic novel, very militant in its content, and it showed that these turbaned Punjabis working for the British Army, killing Chinese people in the Boxer Rebellion. And my son went up to my father, who happens to be a turbaned Punjabi as well, and also a anti-imperialist, revolutionary, I would say. I'm not sure he would agree to that label, but anyway. And my son said to my father, what are these Punjabi men doing, killing Chinese people? And my father was very hurt by that, and he was very ashamed that particular role. And like I said, Punjabis also played a revolutionary role, but they played a counter-revolutionary role in being emotionally manipulated and cajoled and recruited into the British Army. Punjabis were recruited to kill another colonized people who were fighting the British in Iraq and in other places as well. And similarly, the French played these dirty divide and rule tactics as well. They recruited people from sub-Saharan Africa to go then and kill people in Vietnam. And actually, the name of this event, Black Skin, White Fatigues, is a paraphrasing and a spin on the title of the book by Frantz Fanon called Black Skin, White Mask, which is a critique of the white supremacist oppression and resistance of non-white or black people in the colonies and in Europe as well. And actually, I'm not promoting this Qatari propaganda platform, but Al Jazeera did do an interesting documentary on Moroccan soldiers who were sent by the French to kill Vietnamese. But once the French had a spat with the Moroccan king, some of these Moroccan soldiers joined the Viet Minh, the Vietnamese resistance, and a few of them were left behind in Vietnam and made families with Vietnamese people. So there's a very interesting and complex history to do with colonial recruitment. But in terms of mercenaries, I think in terms of the sophistication, and my introductory remarks is going to finish on this point, is that war has always been great business for Western capitalism and imperialism. More so as it develops into greater crises, as the global South starts pushing the unipolar world into history and developing a multipolar world where new poles of power posited in the global South, particularly China, Russia, Asia, the African Union, and the Bolivarian alternative for the Latin America. These are new centers of power which are smashing imperialism across the planet. But in so doing, imperialism is seeing that war is a primary way of making money, and part of that war is the so-called security industry, which also includes mercenaries. So you have the infamous Blackwater mercenaries who were attacked and killed by the resistance in Fallujah, you'll remember, after the war of aggression and occupation by the British and the United States against Iraq. But security organizations are some of the biggest employers now in Europe, including Group 4 and others. And this has been exported to places like Iraq, Somalia, Mali, Libya. And so it's become big business for imperialism, not to divide and rule, but to divide and ruin. And who are the foot soldiers that the British and the imperialists are using to conduct their wars of destabilization in Libya and Syria. Well, in Libya, they bombed from thousands of feet above the British. They're so brave, the British and the French. And actually, just a week ago, it was during 2011, and I know we are rightly commemorate the martyrdom of Mark Duggan and Mike Brown and other brothers and sisters killed by the state in the West. But I've still yet to see a justice campaign for that some 85 civilians killed on August the 8th, 2011 by the British so-called Royal Air Force in a town called Zlitan in North Libya. 85 men, women and children, innocent civilians killed in that town. No justice campaign, no movement for justice for them anywhere in the West. And I think it's really important that we focus on that as well. But who are the foot soldiers of the British in Syria? Is it British soldiers? No. It happens to be mostly young black and Asian young people, mostly males, but some women as well, who have been fooled and deluded in this war on terror, no, this war of neo-colonial terrorism against Libya and Syria. And they are manipulating and in a confused strategy, well, in a confusion-inducing strategy, encouraging these people to become the death squads of British and French and US interests in Libya and Syria. And that also has to be critiqued. So with no further ado, I'm going to ask our speakers to make their contributions, and then we'll go to some Q&A with yourselves. Just to say that this event is part of this is the second of 7 events in London this month, organised by the Malcolm X movement, which is a black and Asian-led decolonial anti-imperialist movement, and it's part of the program of the Malcolm X Summer Festival. So I'm going to first invite Roshan to speak on the issue of Gurkha. Roshan has worked with the Nepali Maoists and worked across South Asia, and he's been someone. Actually, this event happened because you wrote me an email saying, I'm working on the Gurkha issue, are you interested in working on this? And perhaps in my typical style, within an hour I wrote back saying, Roshan, this is great, let's do something about it. So actually the idea from this event just started from that email exchange. So Roshan is going to focus on the Gurkha issue, and then I'm really happy to say we have one of our most prolific and brilliant researchers on these issues, also on the issue of something that's very close to the heart of the Malcolm X movement, Malcolm's Travels Abroad, a book about Malcolm's travels in the Middle East and Africa, which Marika has written and published recently. Also Marika has written this, World War II Colonies and Colonials, and an excellent piece of research on exactly the topic that we're going to talk about. So after Roshan, we're going to go straight to Marika. So you have about 10 minutes each. So please, if you don't mind, please welcome Roshan to the event.
Okay, can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay, hi, thank you all for coming for this historic event, this historic place. Let's hope we make history. Okay, my demand I will state very clearly, lest there's any misunderstanding, okay? I believe it is time for Nepali Gurkha recruitment in the British Army to end as soon as possible, and that you, anti-imperialists and anti-war activists, should make this demand and try and act on it. The aims are clear, the way to accomplish it also, and within the bounds of a real possibility. It is not a utopian demand, but a realistic one, okay? Before making our arguments, I want to clear away and banish some fears and misunderstandings that cloud this issue, okay? We're banishing some ghosts. Firstly, manufactured and manipulated popular sentiment about the army, the loyal Gurkhas, Victoria Cross, all this kind of bullshit. And World War I, World War II are neither here nor there. Sentiment has little to do with what is true and what is for the good. These populist sentiments and the whole military and propaganda machinery, Joanna Lumley, Dan Snow, all that bullshit that propagated, that whole Edinburgh military tattoos, Armed Forces Day, it's just showbiz militarist propaganda, and it has no truth value whatsoever. Let us banish this ghost, okay? Another spectre that we need to banish, an ideology to expose, is that of the charity or NGO sector, okay? Which dominates all representation and discussion of Nepal and actually of Africa and much of Asia. It's all charity NGO bullshit. okay, which a recent earthquake has made much worse. Okay, I have no sentimentality at all about this issue. No country or society can build itself up with charity, white saviours from the West helping helpless natives who are only willing to con and cheat gullible Westerners on a Mother Teresa Save the World trip. It's bullshit, okay? In reality, charity is a very dirty and cynical kind of business, which I can prove from example if required, okay? Maybe it's not required. Okay? Thus, we do not care to be blackmailed by charity, please give money, all this crap, and no people will ever be respected, nor is people free and living with dignity, which is begging for charity, okay? Creating a viable economy, a viable state that serves its people cannot be accomplished by charity and remittances. It is foolish, completely foolish to even believe such a thing, okay? Thirdly, it may be that there are any number of better qualified, more respectable, better informed and better established leaders of the left than myself to raise this demand. A real Nepali or a real British person with some kind of official position. Okay, but in 200 years, none of these well-qualified, well-informed, better educated and better established leaders have even bothered to look at this issue. Thus, I am bringing up an issue which none of these people have chosen to take up or seen it as worth their while or their time. Okay? Indeed, the way this issue is systematically ignored and downplayed by some on the left, which says something about the sorry and pathetic state of the British left. Let's be frank. Okay? It is time to end Gurkha recruitment in the British Army. This demand was not formulated by me, but emerged from Nepal itself. I have only taken the words which have emerged from Nepal itself and present them now to you. Okay? They may have been articulated sometime in the 1950s and since then, but I became aware of the demand to end Gurkha recruitment from the Nepali Maoist Party during the People's War. I was a supporter of the Nepali Maoist Party during the People's War. No apology at all. Okay? The Maoists at that time termed Gurkha recruitment in the British Army as dishonourable and shameful. Okay? And this is the correct way to see it. Dishonourable and shameful. Okay? That 200 years later, this old colonial practice still exists. Shameful that even after a 10-year war, Nepali political leaders have allowed themselves to be bought off and drop this issue. Those who raised it in the first place. Absolutely shameful. Okay? The way issues are framed is almost as important as the issue itself. Okay? Gurkha recruitment in the British Army has been framed mainly about pensions and the right to reside in the UK. We certainly support these things. Okay? However, that is not the main issue. The main issue is about the British imperialist power using one impoverished and oppressed people to fight another for the benefit of imperialism, for British big business, essentially. Gurkha recruitment is ultimately a kind of glorified mercenary work. Let us use the word mercenary, okay, that's what it is. Okay? Fighting for another cause or country, not your own, for money. Okay, that's what it's about really. Okay, let's cut the crap, that's what it's about. Regarding definitions, according to the UN and international relations, just to clear this point, okay, Gurkhas in the British, quote, Gurkhas in the British Army share many characteristics with mercenaries as defined in Article 7, Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention in selling their services for private gain and originating from countries not parties to specific wars and conflicts in which they engage. They are exempted because under Clause D, as members of the UK Armed Forces, they act solely under the authority of that state. Okay, glorified mercenaries. That's what it is. But still mercenaries. The role of the Gurkhas historically is quite obvious. The expanding Nepali state collided with the British East India Company some 200 years ago over the decaying corpse of the Muslim Mughal Empire. After the defeat of the Nepali and the loss of territory, including what is now Sikkim, Darjeeling, Gangtok, all those areas, Jung Bahadur Rana, then autocratic leader, allowed Nepali soldiers to join the British East India Company army. Okay? Their first major operation was to save British imperialism in India by shooting down the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. Okay, that destroyed the Mughal Empire. Also known, depending on your point of view, as the First Indian War of Independence. The Gurkhas thus directly helped in the subjugation of India and helped buttress the empire in India and all over the world, shooting down any revolt against imperialism. That is their role. Okay? There are so many, but in 1922, the Amritsar massacre of Indians protesting Gurkha rule, ordered by General Dyer. The Gurkhas pulled the trigger, and they are thus partly responsible. If you pull the trigger, you are partly responsible. Do not forget that, partly responsible for the crimes of the British Empire against other oppressed peoples. Okay? There are literally too many massacres and put-downs and rebellions to go through. However, even when India became independent, Gurkha recruitment did not end. A large section of Gurkhas, about 30,000 I believe, serve in the Indian army, mainly on the Indo-Pak border, Kashmir, places like that. While only about 3,500, 600 I believe, serve in the British army. As we are in Britain, and it is a job to struggle with our own imperialists, it is right that British Army Gurkhas should be in the line of fire. Gurkhas had a large part in putting down Marxist-Leninist guerrillas in colonial Malaya, the Malayan uprising, and there were a number of beheadings there. Okay? Some people believe that only Islamic extremists behead people. Not true. British Army does it too. Okay? Not true. Recently, Gurkhas have been deployed, of course, where? Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay? The idea of a Pahadi or mountain people from a landlocked country fighting another Pahadi or mountain people on the other side of South Asia, their food is similar, even the language is similar. Okay? It's frankly disgusting. There's been the case of an Afghan fighter beheaded by Gurkha, British Gurkha, and there are no doubt other massacres that we are not aware of in Iraq or Afghanistan involving Gurkhas. They can be logged out. Okay? Nepali Gurkhas were never invited into Iraq or Afghanistan and have no right to be there and be part of the NATO occupying forces. The issue was raised by an Afghan Maoist party, Shola Javid, in 2009. When there was a Maoist-led government in Nepal. I was in Nepal and I was supporting the party. I was working for the party. The issue was ignored, but it is not forgotten. Shola Javid, Afghan Maoist, stated, previously, Nepalese in Afghanistan worked only with American private security companies, quote, the protest letter said. Now in Shindan Airport, Western Afghanistan, they are under the direct command of US Special Forces in Kandahar. They work with Canadian forces at the Provisional Reconstruction Team. In Ghazni, they are associated with Polish forces. In Kabul and other regions, they are linked to American private security companies. I don't need to tell people that private security companies, their legal, moral status, if somebody dies in private security, it's not clear who's responsible. Okay, it's really not clear. Okay? Private security contractors and agencies employ many ex-Gurkhas, ex-British or Indian into private security work. Thus, indirectly, Nepali Gurkhas are fighting and working for US imperialism as well. Okay, one of the bizarre things, if you're in Kathmandu for a while, not a month, but for quite a long time, and you watch TV, okay, adverts for private security work in Israel, South Africa, Iraq, Afghanistan, and many other places is quite common on Nepali TV and media. Actually, if you watch those Hindi films, Hindi serials, they have the advert at the bottom of the screen and stuff, security work fair in Kathmandu, all this kind of thing. Okay, so it's popular prime time viewing. Okay, I've had many jobs. One job I had was teaching English at an institute in Kathmandu. I taught an ex-Indian Gurkha who didn't speak much English, who was going to South Africa. For what? Are there not enough unemployed South Africans that can do security work? You would imagine. However, it seems that the white-owned businesses and gated communities do not trust black African security and need to import Nepali security guards. The head of the school where I taught told me that they don't need great English. They're not going to read Shakespeare, but they only need to, quote, know left, right, forward, back, point, shoot. Okay? Now, Marx said in the Communist Manifesto that money is the universal pimp. Okay? In Nepali or Hindi, a great word, pimp. Let me translate for Nepali. Dalal. Okay? Money can buy everything, including religious leaders, political leaders, revolutionaries, and ideals of whatever kind. The relation between the Nepali Gurkhas and the British is at bottom one of economics. That is the central issue, and the rest follows from that. Okay? As everywhere in the world, for any and every cause, it is always the poor that join the army. And it is mainly poor Nepali, Janjati, Dalit, the small caste that join the British army. It is only also Nepali classified as, quote Marx, Mongolian. Okay, some Nepali are not, they're more like Indian, closer to India. It's only so-called, well, I mean, I don't call it that, that's what they call it in Nepal. Mongolian caste that joined the British army. A Madhesi Muslim could never join the Gurkha regiment because they're not the right caste. This basically obviously goes against the British government's own equality and diversity policies and legislation, needless to say. However, poverty is not an excuse for a supposedly, it's a question, supposedly sovereign nation to continue this practice. Many other countries are poor. Bangladesh is poor, Botswana is poor, Bolivia is poor, Bhutan is poor. There's many poor countries, but they do not sell their people to fight for other countries. Furthermore, in reality, and the Nepali here know it, Nepal is rich in natural resources, including hydropower, and yet its people remain always poor. 200 years of military equipment, and what do Nepali have to show for it? Very, very little. Okay, a lot of blood is being spilt, and they have not gained an awful lot from it. Okay, normally the debate is framed involving just two partners. Okay, the British government and army, and the Nepali government and its citizens, the Gurkhas. Okay. However, in reality, there are 3, 4, and more partners not represented in this conversation. That is, and this is my appeal, to all the countries and people from those countries that have been at the end of British military invasion, and there are so many countries over 200 years. Burma, Afghanistan, Northeast, Northwest frontier, India, Malta, Cyprus, Malaya, China, Boxer Rebellion of 1900, Tibet, 1904, just a few, there's many more. Okay. At the moment, Iraq and Afghanistan, and next, wherever the British, US, NATO alliance chooses as the next target. You have your guess what it is. Maybe Syria, Libya, Iran, I don't know. Let's see. Okay. Sun Tzu, the great Chinese philosopher, said, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." He also said, "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." The demand to end Gurkha recruitment is thus designed to destroy an entire regiment of the British Army, set up some 200 years ago by William Fraser. Let us stop pretending what we already know. The struggle between imperialism and anti-imperialism, between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie is and will ultimately and can only be military. Okay, all this occupy, hippie crap, it doesn't mean anything. Okay, there is no escaping that brutal truth. Okay, and many people know this already. Thus, this call is aimed at anti-imperialists, and especially to all those from the various countries and peoples that are struggling against British imperialism and have made their way to the UK. It is your right to call for an end to Gurkha recruitment. If it is possible to destroy a regiment in the British Army without anyone being hurt, no lives lost, no casualties, and even, in fact, many lives being saved, but to face merely the problem of dealing with some 3,000 soldiers that need a new job, that is quite a small price. Okay, unemployment is not an unusual thing. Okay, I mean, the 20,000 or more PLA, People's Liberation Army, they also don't have jobs. It's not an uncommon thing. Okay, there are other things to do apart from go and kill people in Iraq, not your country. Okay. So if it is now, even the life of a single innocent man, a single revolutionary or anti-imperialist like that Afghan beheaded is worth more than all the filthy lucre and the medals such as Victoria Cross and all this military nonsense. Okay, it is possible, I believe, to end Gurkha recruitment simply by bringing up the issue and exposing it to light and trying to force a debate on this issue. The Gurkha regiment are, strictly speaking, a weak link in the British Army. We know the establishment cannot answer these types of questions because at bottom all they have is money and lies and propaganda. That's it. They don't have anything apart from that. Okay, medals, money, lies. That's it. All the proper propaganda and populist sentiment cannot hide what is an ugly, ugly thing. Okay, Malcolm X. As we are speaking for the Malcolm X movement here, distinguish between the house and the field Negro, quote, okay? That is, there are some people among different black and Asian communities that identify with imperialism, okay? That's always the case. So every community is divided into two, okay? That's with blacks, Asians, Muslims, everything. That's the case, okay? But that's not a reason to not bring up this issue. Therefore, I'm asking for anti-imperialists, anti-war activists, political leaders in Nepal, especially those among the Maoist parties, as well as the British left, to call for an end to Gurkha recruitment in the British Army. It is time to end Gurkha in the British Army once and for all. Okay? We would like to finish by paraphrasing a statement made by the FLN about the Harkis, Algerians who fought with the French army against their own people. To paraphrase. Gurkhas, you were not born to be the bulldog of British imperialism. You can't deny your origins. Your place awaits you among your brothers. Thank you. Lal Salam.
Thanks, Roshan, for that. Important points to make and for us, food for us to discuss over. So I just forgot to make my point about Fanon and the title of this event. So the event is called Black Skin, White Fatigues after his book Black Skin, White Masks. But the point I wanted to make about Frantz Fanon, and it ties in with the recruitment issue, I don't know many people know, but it's well established, and anyone who knows the biography of Frantz Fanon, he fought with the French army in the Second World War. He was from Martinique. He thought French was the mother country and the epitome of all that it is to be human and wonderful. And so he actually fought in the French army as well. And obviously then he ended up fighting with the FLN in Algeria. A beautiful and correct corrective of his previous mistake, perhaps. Right? But I think that's an important point because people critique Gandhi as well for some disgusting racist things he definitely said in South Africa. But then Gandhi went on to mobilize the whole subcontinent against colonialism. I think.
He's the other man. He was a Marxist, he was communist, and he didn't agree with Gandhi. And I don't agree with Gandhi because Gandhi, how did Gandhi divide up in? That was the whole thing. That's what, isn't it? I think I'm not that. I don't read a lot of Marx, but I would say that man, whose statues outside the Indian embassy is quite important. So I would have a thing I'd read his books and was reading him. He was a great man. But I can't remember his name. I wish that someone could remember the man.
Mangal Pandey?
No, I think it's Nehru actually, the statue.
Thank you.
But Madam will
That man.
Thank
That,
you.
what was his name?
Nehru.
Yeah,
So this is from, this is from Anjana Bishanke. It said, it's titled My View on the British Gurkha Army. She is a Central Committee member of the United Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist. She says she is a farmer and also a member of the Legislative Parliament. So she says...
A former member of the...
Sorry, former, not a farmer. A former member of the Legislative Parliament. Thanks for that, Roshan. She says, distinguished chairman, esteemed guests and fellow friends, it is my privilege to take this opportunity to share my opinion on the topic of the British Gurkha Army. This will take about 5 minutes. During the Gurkha War, 1814 to 1816, between the Gurkha Kingdom in Nepal and East India Company, the British were impressed by the Gurkhali soldiers, which they called Gurkhas. The war ended with the signing of the Sugali Treaty in 1816. In the peace treaty, it was agreed that the Gurkhalis would be recruited to serve under the contract in the East India Company's army. In case you don't know, East India Company was just the front name for British colonialism in India. Traditionally, recruitment had been only from the Nepali hill groups, such as the Chetri, Takuri, Magar, and Gurung. These three castes are the original Gurkhas who fought against British. Brahmin, Sherpa, Tamang were not allowed to be recruited into the Gurkha army. Today, Gurkhas are from all tribes of Nepal, including Gurung, Magar, Chetri, Takuri, Rai, Limbu, Sherpa, Tamang, Nuers, etc. In 1947, India became independent from the UK, and it was decided that the two governments would split the Gurkha regiment between the British and Indian armies. 6 Gurkha units became part of the new Indian army, while 4 were transferred to the British army. The tripartite agreement between the United Kingdom, India and Nepal was signed in 1947 concerning the right of Gurkha military service. Hassan? Okay. Role of the Nepali government. During the war period, there was the Shah regime in Nepal. There were 2 tendencies on the war affair in the royal palace. Some of them were in favour of continuing the war against East India companies. Others were in favour of peace treaty and agreement with the East India Company. The second tendency had won in the palace. The Sugarli Treaty was a compulsion of the then Nepalese king because the British army was modern and strong in comparison to the Nepali army. But to agree with the provision of British Gurkha army in the treaty was the blunder of the Nepali side, the current situation of Nepali society. After a few years of Sugarli Treaty, Nepal fell into an autocratic Rana regime. After the Rana regime, King Mahindra started the autocratic panchayat system. Nepali people were agitated against panchayat system and established constitutional monarchy and parliamentary system in 1990. But Nepalese people, including marginalized groups like Janajatis, Dalit women, Madheshi, indigenous group and other minorities were not satisfied with the parliamentary system. The Maoist party started the People's War in 1996 and it developed its power with the strong support of these marginalized peoples. The war ended by the peace agreement in 2009, and the result nowadays in Nepal is trying to make the new constitution and form a constituent assembly. The Republic of Nepal has been established. And she says, my opinion. Theoretically, to join the British or Indian army by Nepali youth is not to be supported, because as a Nepali people, to serve another nation is not good. On the other hand, the British and Indian rulers have been using Nepali youth against different types of people's movements in all over the world, and the weakness is on our side because we cannot spread and encourage awareness to make them work for their own motherland. Besides this, practically we cannot stop our youth to join the British and Indian army because we do not have any alternative jobs for them. If they get secure and satisfied job in Nepal, automatically they stop joining the British or Indian army. Our youth are also going to the Gulf countries for jobs. But the job of the British and Indian army for our youth seems more secure and attractive compared to the jobs in the Gulf countries. Nowadays we are trying to make a new constitution. In the new constitution there will be a special right of indigenous and marginalized people in the state for the right to work and jobs. If we succeed to make this, the number of the youth interested to join British and Indian army will automatically decrease. Thank you and Lal Salam. With no hesitation, I'm going to ask Marika to make a contribution. Thank you, Marika, for coming down and accepting the speaking invitation. Like I said, Marika has produced a book exactly on this subject, which she has a few copies. We have some time after the discussion period, after Marika, so you have a chance to talk to Marika and to Roshan and amongst yourselves, and perhaps to hopefully buy all the copies of this book that Marika has with her, and I'm sure that will happen. So please, with no more further ado, please welcome Marika Sherwood.
Everybody, and thank you for the invitation, Sukant. I must tell you, I'm here not as a political activist, but as a historian who writes for political reasons. And my political reason is that history, as written in this country, is about white people, usually upper-class men, and queens maybe. The English working class doesn't exist. The many immigrants who have formed the English nation, we are not a homogeneous Anglo-Saxon group, as Maggie Thatcher said we were, is also ignored. And of course, the presence of black people, that is people of African origins, have been here 2,000 years, that's all, is never anywhere at all. I think people from India have probably not been here for longer than about 700 years. So that's an awful lot of history to uncover. Never mind looking at the influence of colonialism on what became the British Empire. So what I'm going to do now is just give you examples of what I think has been omitted by historians when they are accounting for World War I and World War II. To me, this is important because of all the celebrations going on everywhere. You know, we won the war and weren't we wonderful? And the we is always white men, even white women who are part of the war are usually not recognized. And because I'm hoping that some of you will be able to have a go at the government for what is in the school curricula, which of course ignores all of this. Africa and India simply do not exist in the school curriculum, which is just horrendous, because the sort of subtext of that is that the only people who ever existed in the world are people who look like me, that is Europeans, and more Western Europeans than Eastern Europeans like me. We don't exist very much either. Right, so World War I, perhaps the most hideous part of what was going on there that has been completely ignored was the strafing by the RAF of Indians protesting against the various defence and other regulations which were brought in. And the RAF was just sent to shoot them down. And to this day I have not been able to discover just how many people were killed, because of course this is hidden history. That to me is the most horrendous, that you could send in the RAF to shoot down people protesting and then just cover up the history. Some people suggest that thousands were murdered. We just don't know. The idea that you do that because people are holding perfectly non-riotous marches to protest against the various regulations brought in, most of which were about you having to go and work in for the military. You know, you just don't do that. Of course, hundreds of people were shoved into jail. Now, World War I, try to find out just how many troops there were, whether they were Indians or Africans or anybody from the colonies. And you can't. Depends on where you look. So, from India, there was supposed to be some millions serving, of whom something like 100 to 200,000 were killed or were missing. Now, what does missing mean in official statistics? People don't just vanish. But one thing this missing to me means, which is used as a category for the data for both World War I and World War II, is that they weren't paid. If they were paid, then you would know what happened to them, and did they continue to be paid, or were they white, you know, just what? Now, what is always missing from almost any account of World War I is the war in Africa. And there were some Indians fighting there as well. The war in Africa was fought so that the British and the French could take over the German colonies. As simple as that. How many were fighting? 2 million, 3 million, 200,000, 100,000? Again, it depends on where you look for the data. How many died? Exactly the same. Depends on where you look for the data. So again, I want to know, were any of them ever paid? Then there weren't only men in the military, there were what were called pioneer corps. A very interesting terminology. It doesn't mean a thing, does it, when you see pioneer corps? But they were the labourers. Because there were no roads in Africa, or very few, and very few railways, everything had to be carried. So if you were a soldier, you would want at least 2 of us carrying all your equipment and your guns and your ammunition. If you were an officer, you had between 3 and 4 of these pioneer carrier corps doing the carrying for you. Were they ever paid? Do we know how many of them there were? Do we know how many died? Again, it depends on where you look. And the figures vary by 200-300%. Not by 10,000, but by 500,000. Then not only that, but there was a famine in East Africa, which was then compounded because of droughts. That was then compounded by the Spanish flu, which was ravaging Europe, arriving there because of the ships that were taking ammunition to the British troops there. That killed more. 500,000 people? 1 million people? Again, we don't know. Not only that, but again, remaining in Africa, where did the food come from for all these millions of men in the military and the pioneer corps? After all, the Germans couldn't send anything out there, right? Because we had taken over the German ports very early in the war. So they had to get food locally. Did they pay for any of it? How many of those fighting for Germany died? Nobody could find any German archives at all about any of this. Now, Britain tried to send out enough food, but it certainly didn't succeed. So how did the British troops get the food from the local African people? And how many of those African people starved to death because their men had been taken away, put into the military or the carrier corps, and there was this drought, and nobody to help work the farms, and the troops coming through and just grabbing everything they could to eat? How many women were raped? Don't tell me the soldiers and the pioneer corps didn't rape any of the women. They'd be the only men in the world who didn't do that, especially under those conditions. You cannot find out anything about it. The other thing that is usually hidden now to do not with Africa but with the Caribbean is that eventually they did recruit some military from what was called the West Indies then, and they were trained as military. They were sent to America to be trained, and there they were trained as fighting soldiers. When they were actually brought to fight over here and in North Africa by the British, they were used as labour corps. Now imagine how you felt then. You know, you were eventually recruited, you were paid, but you were trained to fight, and now you're just a labourer. Eventually, some of them mutinied because they were told to clean the lavatories of Italian prisoners of war. Now imagine what on earth that made you feel like. So eventually they mutinied, and they were sentenced to imprisonment, and their leader was supposed to be killed, but then that was commuted to 20 years imprisonment. So I will finish this summary bit about World War I by this lovely quote from Winston Churchill, because I will go on to say something else about him. Because we always celebrate Winston Churchill. If you read all that he's written, you'll see what a racist thug he was. And this is a lovely quote from him from 1922, when after the war, England realized that it might have to ease conditions in India, or there might be just a bit more trouble. So there was a proposition to Indianize some of the government. And Winston Churchill doubted the wisdom of granting democratic institutions to backward races with no capacity for self-government. Right? This is just, you know, if you read Churchill's book about his trip through Africa, it's just a fabulous introduction to his racism. Right, so Now, World War II, what is omitted from World War II? Well, as I was talking about the West Indies, one of the things that's omitted is that because clearly you couldn't trust the West Indians, right? They didn't recruit anybody for the military until a year before the war ended. And that was only done because the colonial governments were in a terrible situation. The British were sending out all this propaganda, aid the mother country, support the mother country. But you didn't recruit anyone. So the governors were afraid that something might just blow up, so it was decided that they'd better restore the West India Regiment. But what they did manage to do in the West Indies and in all the colonies was collect money. Support the mother country. Please give us not the odd penny or two, but the odd 10,000 or two. And many of the richer people did, and so did many of the poor people. So millions were given. To quote to you from the House of Commons, 1943, the total contribution of the colonial empire towards the prosecution of the war now amounts in round figures to £48 million. A lot of that, of course, came from the governments themselves, so they're collecting all their taxes, but instead of doing anything about development, the money is being sent over here to support the war. So if you're looking at development issues in the colonies, look at what the loss of that money would have meant to them. Right? Just imagine, vast sums of money. And the propaganda was very successful, so poor people collected money and helped pay. There were planes that were flying saying, built with contributions from the West Indies, and so on. So everybody was helping. One of the other things that's always left out when we talk about the war is not just that there were all these troops from the colonies and just how they were used, but all the other material that came from the colonies. The data's all in my book, but what is important is that you have to ask, without the oil from Trinidad, could the RAF have flown all the planes it was flying? Never mind the money that came from the colonies to build them. Could they have been flown without the oil from Trinidad? Could they have been built without the various metals, including massive amounts of bauxite and tin, that came from the colonies? What about all the food that came from the colonies? Could people have eaten here? Or would people here have starved without that food coming in? If the uniforms and shoes had not been made in India, what would the soldiers have been wearing? Not just Indian troops, but all the other troops. So there are all these other massive contributions that are always just completely ignored. Now, as I'm talking of things being shipped, bauxite, etc., between 30 and 40% of the seamen in the merchant marine were colonials. So could you have, in fact, shipped all that stuff here, had it not been from people from the colonies working on those merchant vessels? Now, when you look at the conditions in the merchant vessels, or on the farms, or in the mines, or in the military, what you find in the merchant marine is that there's a wonderful hierarchy with white Brits at the top and Fijians at the bottom, all doing the same work. But the whites being paid roughly 3 times what a Fijian was being paid for doing the same work. People working in the mines in Africa were usually forced labourers. And were they paid? That is not quite clear either. they probably had to be paid something, or more of them would have deserted than did desert. But what is of course important is that they were working for private companies. It wasn't the government digging up the bauxite or the cobalt or the magnesium or anything else. It was private companies that were making an absolute fortune selling these materials to the British government and paying their workers next to nothing. White workers in all of those mines, who were all very senior, were paid up to 10 times what the African workers were paid. And if you look at pay rates in the military, it's pretty much the same, but the difference isn't quite so great. In most of the African military, the black men received something like a third of what a white soldier in the same position would have been paid. And of course there were no officers in the African armies until Seth Anthony was sent here to be trained in 1942. So we had 2 Gold Coasters trained in 1942 to be officers, but only 2 for the whole war. I think India did a little better in terms of some level of officers, not very high, but they did manage to train some. And I don't know how they pay compared to a white man. I imagine again it would have been something like a third. So all of this is absolutely ignored. You know, we won the war, and I want to say, well, excuse me, if it wasn't from the colonies, I think you would have bloody well lost the war. That, you know, America might have won it for you or not. Now, as I mentioned Winston Churchill, I want to say something very different that is very important, I think, in terms of the post-war histories. In 1941, Churchill and Roosevelt met and signed a treaty. Britain was desperate to get American help and ended up owing billions to America after the war, which is a very, very interesting political story of how that played out. And we didn't pay it off until 2006. So it kind of lasted a long time, right? 2006. But when they met in 1941 to come to some kind of deal, the 4th clause in the deal that they signed said that freedom and independence will be restored to all people who have lost it. Now you can imagine how colonial people felt about that. They said, yippee! You know, you're getting back our independence once we've won the war. They've signed this agreement. It said all the people who've lost it will get it back. Churchill, of course, said, no, never. That refers only to England. And this battle went on and on from 1941 onwards about who meant what. And what I don't know, and maybe some of you can know, or some of you can find out, is there was a big push to have this whole issue put on the agenda of the United Nations, which was being formed as the war was ending. And initially it was there, and then America agreed, and I don't know why, to have it taken off. So when the UN first met in San Francisco, this issue of the colonial issue was not on the agenda, despite the Atlantic Charter. And as you can imagine, the Atlantic Charter was used both during the war and after the war as part of the struggle for independence and getting a Churchill and so on. But, you know, so I think I will stop there. This is just an introduction to what's been left out of what we are told about World War I and World War II. The book, of course, only deals with World War II, and there's quite a bit in it on the home front, because again, the propaganda in this country is about the home front here. There was no home front anywhere else. Well, excuse me, there was. And a pretty grim home front at that. So I try to sort of introduce that as well. It's a very small book, so I can't take you deeply into any of it, but there's a lot of references that you can follow up if you're interested. Thank you very much, Sukant.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions, criticisms, discussion, etc.
Now, the British Army employed Indians even before 1857. In fact, as you know, there were Indian soldiers fighting in China during the Opium War. So, but obviously, like 1857, a whole lot of things changed. And I just wonder if you could just expand a little on how it came that, I mean, where the Sikh regiments formed at the same time, how did the Gurkha regiments come to be formed at that particular point? So that's one thing. And one other thing, kind of a big difference, sorry, I hope I'm not going on.
No, please.
Was if you can say something about the role of the UN, because let's remember that the UN also has these dreadful peacekeepers now. So what is the role of the UN in this context? So really two separate things, one about 1857 and one about the UN.
Just in terms of your first question, have you done any research yourself, Amrit? Because about this.
Well, I'm no expert on this, but actually was reading a very interesting book, which is the last in the trilogy by Amitabh Ghosh. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Flood of Fire, and it's actually some of the things in it are very, very interesting because it's been based on quite careful historical research. And it looks at the way in which caste was consolidated in the Indian armies well before 1857, which is something I didn't realize. So, I was quite struck by it.
Thanks for that,
Could I
Amrit.
offer some information to the last speaker?
Yeah, what I'm going to do, if that's okay, I know the two comrades have their hand up. I'm going to take you, Peter, straight in response to Amrit. Then I'm going to come back to the panel, and then we're going to go back to you guys, if that's okay. Yeah, please, Peter, go on.
Yeah, just to say how the formation came in the British Army after 57. In fact, what had happened, they had Sikh regiments, they had Gurkha regiments, they had Maratha, but the bulk of the army was Bengali. And it was the Bengali, 90% of Bengalis actually joined the mutiny. The only ones who stayed loyal were the Gurkhas, the Pathans, the Rajputs, they stayed loyal to these Indian companies, later the Raj. And so the English developed from that a recognition of necessity that these were martial races. And the English actually promoted the idea that was referred to by the chairman when he opened the meeting. They encouraged that they were a martial races, and the other races were sedentary or agricultural. Bengalis, were the first people that ever joined the British when they landed in Bengal, were suddenly down-paced to become administrators, to be in commerce, and they were taught English. It was a deliberate thing to teach them English. But in fact, all those groups continued, and only into particular Gurkha regiments would be recruited. Other people were absolutely excluded, and they developed. The reason that Dyer called for Gurkhas at Amritsar, and he made sure there was no British soldiers there, no British officers to countermand, because they'd been trained. All of these regiments, the Sikhs especially, they'd been taught to look down on the other. To look down on the Indians and the mass of the population. So Dyer knew they would follow his orders to shoot. Although some didn't. Some actually raised their rifles, and he said, "You're paid to shoot low." And that was the mentality that unfortunately was inculcated. But it really is. I mean, I'm Irish, and we had it too. The fighting Irish, there's an Irish brigade, the Irish front and all that. And they did it with the Scots. They've done it. The British have used all of these people, and it is divide and conquer, because they would use the Gurkhas against the Sikhs, and then they formed Sikh regiments after the Sikh wars. And unfortunately, in 1947, the Indian new government took over the army as it was, and they even kept. For example, in the Gurkhas, they still keep caste distinctions. There's some regiments of Kshetris and Brahmins, and they also have stuck to the martial racist theory. The reason that the Sikhs were bodyguards to the president, only Sikhs and Pathans can be. No one else could be. And of course, as Mrs. Gandhi found out, they weren't as loyal, at the heel of the hunt. But it is. There's 40,000 Gurkhas now in the Indian Army, and they serve in Kashmir. They served in every. Well, I'll just give you a quote by Modi, and this is recently. He said, "India has not won a fight in which Nepali has not bled, in which Nepali has not been killed." Now, we've had the campaign here to get rights of residence, quite right, equality and so on. In India, the situation is even more parlous for Gurkhas there. They don't get promotion, they're worse paid, and I don't know, in Kashmir, Sergeant Gurung was killed 2 years ago, and I saw this on Nepalese television, and they didn't even repatriate his body to his family in Kathmandu. They sent them a video of it that they could play on the machine. So even in death, there wasn't equality for Gurkhas, and the idea that Nehru, there's a difference between Nehru, Gandhi, and then Modi. The biggest massacre on the Indian subcontinent was in Hyderabad in 1948, when Nehru sent in India and Gurkhas. The first engagement they were engaged in, and the 5th Gurkhas were commended for heroism, which I'm sure is true. But the Hindu regiments were so fired up. A report was commissioned, and it only came out in 2006. It was suppressed for 60 years, and the Indian army was responsible between 27 and 40,000 deaths, and that was under Nehru. I mean, they talk about Modi and Gujarat, Rajiv Gandhi after his mother was, but there's nothing compared to Nehru, the great patron saint, secular saint of the West. It was a patina as much as the holy man Faker was with Gandhi.
Thanks, Peter. Amra, any responses to that before I come back to the panel?
No, only just to say that I've seen the extent of racism against what Roshan mentioned as the Mongolian-looking people from Nepal, because you see it in the women who are trafficked, the lowest paid workers, and so on and so on. So it's absolutely endemic. I think the whole massacre in Hyderabad is one of the most terrible things that happened in India. But I think we also have to look at a more modern era now. And I think Modi is perhaps one of the worst in terms of both his kowtowing to imperialism, as well as his vicious hatred of all minority groups. And maybe this is a good point to mention to people that a group I'm involved with, South Asia Solidarity Group, is organizing a protest for the visit of Modi in November. So if you're interested, then you just check us out on www.southasiasolidarity.org or on Twitter, @Asia Solidarity. It'd be really good to talk about all of these issues. We'll be having a series of meetings as well to look at these sort of issues in more detail.
Thanks, Amra. Roshan, do you want to come back on anything? Yeah, Marika, did you have any comments on it? Okay, Roshan, do you want to?
Okay, I just want to come back on two things. The first one I'll address is the UN. Okay, I don't claim to be an expert about the UN. I was in Nepal. I supported the Nepali Maoist movement, and when they were put in the United Nations monitored cantonment in Chitwan, Shaktikor, on the border with India, border of Bihar, I was there as English teacher. Okay, there's something like 300,000 Nepal army soldiers. I think it's about that. And they serve everywhere. They serve Iraq, Afghanistan, Congo, Haiti, everywhere. Libya, I'm sure, and things like that. That's another kind of thing that needs to be exposed, and there's not a lot of clarity about it. The UN, I believe, they have a good name, but they don't deserve one. It's really an imperialist organization. Let's be honest about it. I mean, like say in Iraq, NATO does the fighting, but then the UN come in afterwards and make sure everything's okay. But again, for the Nepal army, it brings money, and it's slightly better than in my opinion, the joining British Army, but UN is a huge problem, absolutely. I think more research about it. I'd like to know more about it, frankly. I'd like to know about it. There just isn't that much about what UN peacekeepers actually do. I've been to different countries where I've seen peacekeepers, and I don't think they do a lot. I mean, it's there to make sure imperialism is okay. The oil is controlled by the West and things like that. And this, I don't have that much time or respect for the UN, but they do exist. I'd like to see more analysis on it to get clear myself. Just quickly to the comrade who raised the issue of raising the demand in the UK. Okay, firstly, I was in Nepal after the peace process, and it was one of the demands. It was dropped when, I think it was the British ambassador, I think it was Andrew Hall, I can't quite remember, met Chairman Prachanda, and then afterwards the demand was dropped in the party. Okay, it wasn't allowed to be brought up. Okay, I was working for the Red Star, Maoist newspaper, mainly English checker, and I wrote an article back then where it was mentioned, but it wasn't allowed to be. I brought it up with Maoist leaders, and it was just dropped. Okay, that was due to British pressure, and that's the way diplomacy works. That is British diplomacy. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point is, it's not so much addressing the British Army. I don't think British Army are going to listen to me, but I think the fact that nobody ever talks about it. Okay, nobody brings up and looks at it in this way. To even look it up in this way and to ask for it, I think that will already weaken it. Ultimately, it's up for the Nepali government, okay, to end it. Okay, not the British Army. It's the Nepali government that have to do it. Okay, but I think to make it an issue, okay, is very important, just to show what kind of army it is. Okay, mercenary army. To cut all this blah 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 Jawana Lumley bullshit. Okay, so that kind of thing. I believe it's worth bringing up, because I don't think it would take much more than that. I really don't think, for instance, I won't say how I know, but I know for a fact that there are army people in British and Indian Army who read my article, okay, but they don't comment, because they don't really have any arguments, and if they do, and there's counter-arguments from academics and so forth, and more light is shown on it, it can only prove what I'm saying. They have no argument, it's a cruel thing. So I think it should be brought up, and it will discredit the army more, and ultimately to dismantle part of the imperialist war machine is surely part of the task. Whether it's idealist or not, I'm not sure. It seems to me to make the demand and see where we can go is where we can go. I mean, most British left-wing groups, to be honest, haven't done anything at all, really, of any great significance, in my opinion. Okay, so we do what we can and see what we can do. At the moment, I don't see any parties or groups have any real answer. It's just slogans and things like that. But this is a concrete thing. It's a thing what we want. It's clearly stated. We're hoping to get academics and various other people involved to bring light to this issue. And that is all. Bring light to the issue and look at it. I believe public opinion in Britain itself will change by that. That's all. Nobody's killed, nobody dies, and yet we smash a regiment of the British Army. Everybody wins. So I believe it is worth bringing up. I mean, I've got to say, I've approached a large number of left-wing groups, Stop the War Coalition, people I've known for more than a decade as comrades. And even though I've known them, to this issue, they don't reply to me. It's odd, I've had replies from America, France, Greece, Germany, but people I've known in Stop the War Coalition, from quite close, no reply. So I can see there's some forces that don't want to bring this issue up. I can give examples, but I don't really want to slag anyone off. That's not my interest. There are forces that don't want this thing discussed. I just want to make it discussed, and from there we'll see what happens. If just by discussion it's enough to cause a change, then that's a great thing. Okay, so that is
my point of view on that. Thanks, Roshan. Just before I ask the comments to come in and others to come in, just a few very brief observations. I mean, first of all, the Malcolm X movement doesn't want this to be the end of discussing this issue publicly. We want it, for example, Mustafa Traore, who's Malcolm X movement coordinator, he couldn't speak in the room today because he's in Paris doing some family issues. He needs to make his contribution about Mali and West Africa. Marika touched on it very briefly, but he's done some research he wants to present. My father's done this research on Punjabi folk songs in relation to the First World War recruitment in Punjab. So if people are in the room who are interested in developing this idea and developing more events, please do speak to me immediately after this event. The second point is a nuance, and it's something that was reminded in conversations with my father in his research in relation to the Punjabis recruiting the First World War. By the way, there's a monument in Brighton called the Chhatri, which people who know South Asian language means umbrella. It's a memorial Chhatri dedicated to the Punjabi soldiers who fought in the British Army in the First World War. There was a military hospital in Brighton where many Indian soldiers were convalescing, and so they made a little memorial there. But the problem is the memorial is up in the downs in the countryside, and we tried to get to it, and we couldn't even get half a mile from it because the road is just a mash-up country road. And so there's nothing there, it's just fields with one Chhatri and no one knows about it there. So, but the nuance point is this, from the Punjabi folk songs and what the comrade from Nepal said. Because I think, if you don't mind me, Roshan, I think there was a difference in tone in your presentation and in her presentation. And I think that's important to recognize those difference of tones and nuances. And it's not to say I necessarily agree with you or her more. I think we need to come with a variety of approaches to this. While agreeing it's an imperialist strategy, we oppose it, and all the kind of critique that we make. Nevertheless, I think there needs to be some empathy, perhaps not sympathy, with because the comment said basically, look, we need to give them jobs. If we can't give them jobs, then we can't really stop them from getting involved in the Gurkha regiment. Right, and that pertains to the challenges of the condition of people in Nepal and other places of the global south. These are really important bread and butter issues. People need to be housed, clothed, fed, jobs, healthcare, etc. These are basic things that we take for granted here. Reminded of a discussion with a Bengali comrade on Facebook just yesterday, who was denouncing orthodox socialist models that Chavez and Maduro and Korea are developing, and it's impacting negatively some indigenous groups in Ecuador. And I thought, here you guys are discussing on Facebook with your laptops and your Western imperialist gadgets, pontificating over a people in Ecuador who have got nothing compared to the level of access to technology. And you've got access to that technology because of imperialist looting on the planet, particularly places like Congo, which a lot of our the minerals and the metals that everyone has in their phones come from the Congo, and that's the reason millions of Congolese people are being killed. So anyway, it's important to kind of develop these nuances because we're trying to reach out, obviously, to these communities as well. But again, I sympathise with your more perhaps spiky critique because these people are being sent off to kill people. Right? It's unacceptable. It's a crime that we are complicit in as Global South people, and that is just a red line crossed. So it's difficult to get the tone and the kind of the atmosphere music correct. But please, comrades. Yep.
I want to take up the issue of mercenaries. The Gurkhas are undoubtedly mercenaries. I was in Nepal in 2008. I visited the People's Liberation Army in Gurkha. That's where the revolution began. While I was there, 4 Gurkhas got killed in Afghanistan. And the People's Liberation Army soldiers, they said, good, they're enemies, kill them, okay? But aren't they all mercenaries? My partner was Spanish, she pointed this out to me. Not the officers, but the other ranks in the British Army, they're all mercenaries. They're all taking money to kill and oppress people who've done them no harm whatsoever, aren't they? What harm have the Afghani people ever done to people in Britain? None whatsoever, and yet Afghanistan has been invaded 4 times by British forces, and on 3 occasions it's been defeated, like now. Why do people join the army? Well, some people, and they're quite upfront about it, do it for money. They can get better pay in the army than they can on Civvy Street. Is that a good reason to join any army? Because you're going to get paid better, and that gives you the right to go and kill people? Of course it isn't. No, some people join it to learn a trade. You know, again, is that a just reason, because you want to learn a trade, to also engage in oppression and killing? Of course, there are some who join it because they like hurting and killing people. Some of them are psychopaths. I mean, they're a minority. Some of them come from military families, there's a tradition there, but again, perhaps they ought to think a little about what they're doing. Now, the Stop the War Coalition was mentioned, I think, by Roshan, and the Stop the War Coalition fell down badly on this because the Stop the War Commission refused to go to British military personnel saying, you are fighting bad wars, don't do it. They would not do it, okay? I live in Nottingham, I tried to get them to do it. There's big barracks here, Chetwynd Barracks. A lot of the military personnel mustered there, or must have, before they went to Iraq and Afghanistan. It ended up 3 of us going down there and leafleting the military personnel. You know, did they attack us? No. Some ignored us. Some of them discussed the matter with us in a civil way. Some said they disagreed. Some of them said they agreed that, you know, we shouldn't be in those countries. It can be done. We should do that. You know, we should do it all the time. Telling people, don't join the army. It's a bad army. It's going to oppress ordinary people like you. And of course, they use them against their own people, should we say. I mean, what about the fire brigade? They used to regularly roll out the army with their green goddess fire tenders when the firemen went on strike. They can't do that now because they've sold off the auxiliary fire tenders. Going back to Stop the War, look, Stop the War failed to go to the armed forces saying this is all crap, you're doing bad things, it's no good for you. And as a result, the only people who they kept silent when it was all the cult hero nonsense, what is it called, Wooden Bassett, where they were there all the flag. Anyway, they kept silent, so what happened, in the end, it was extreme Muslim fundamentalists who turned out in Luton to give the troops parading a bit of stick. And they did so in a stupid, abusive way, you know, slogans saying like, fuck off you bastards. So what that led to the founding of with the English Defence League, right? That led to the founding of a racist, fascist organisation. And that came out of the failure of progressive people, leftists in Britain, to go to the troops saying, you are mercenaries, it's bad to take money, to go and kill people who are not your enemies. Yeah, that should be our approach. It isn't just the Gurkhas who are mercenaries, it's people in Britain. Yes, another reason is, well, I come from an ethnic minority and, you know, we're discriminated against, it's harder to get jobs, so that's why I joined. That's still not a good excuse, is it, to go and kill people? So, they're all damn mercenaries.
Thank you. Ollie?
Yeah, I think the demand to end Gurkha recruitment is important because it's obviously a demand that's come out of an oppressed nation, Nepal. And that is obviously therefore a weak link in the British Imperialist army at the moment. I mean, it's all very well to say that you can't do anything to attack the army until we have a revolution, but you know, the things that happened beforehand, you have to attack it where it's weak. And if that is a genuine demand that's coming out from Nepal, then anti-imperialists in Britain should show solidarity with those people making that demand. If that's where there is a weak link, and it's not necessarily impossible that it can't become an important demand, especially if Roshan has said that the British government has put pressure on the Communist Party in Nepal to not raise this issue.
Okay.
entering some British people, British government or British people going that time. And what happened in India before British went to India, and black people, the Turk people import like horses. If you go to the back history of the England, they sell the horses to the India and they bring foods like that. And black people and imported to Africa, and they went to the participated Turk army. Turk means, you know, the Turkestan, Kazakhstan, the killing the people, invasion the South Asia like India, Bangladesh. They are before the Hindu. Now they are the Muslim Pakistan. They are Hindus, and they killing people and expanding. And that time, two types of Mughal kings. One supported to the British East India Company, and one against the East India Company. You know, East India Company, and they bring the all some ornaments to the some. They give the gifted, and the chief minister of the Kashmir, the Hindu, the public, the Muslim, they give some gifted to the Kohinoor, you know, the diamond is the biggest in this country, or the gift. And the Indian, some people like Gujarati people working for the British, like the before what happened, what the name of the Jawahar Nehru friends, Mahatma Gandhi, they are working for the British. That, and they went to the Africa. Oh, what I am doing here? Because I am. What is my nationality? You know, of course, the Indian people went to the black country. These South Asian people, it not looks like my is different. Why is coming here? And they're feeling why, like black people also like depressed, because we people like the Asian and the collateral, they combine and they go to the fight for the East India Company. And some people, the Chinese, like Nepalese people. And what happened in the Maharana Pratap Rana, something or the some king to Balaji, the South Indian, because the British is not evasion as very strong king. Like our border, like Bihar, Patna, this is Uttar Pradesh, you know, the weak kings, Hindu kings. And the Turk people went and they go to the Bengal, you know, like Kolkata. You know, so, and they want to some war preserve for the Muslim people too, because they're killing for the Hindus people. Before there's a lot of missing history, you know.
Please tell us your opinion on Gurkha
Nathuram
issue.
Godse. Nathuram Godse.
No, Gurkhas.
Gurkha.
Speak of the Gurkha.
The Gurkha people, I'm from the Nepal. Nepal is divided two parts. One is the mountain area, in one is the plain area. We live the plain area. And the upper area, a lot of population. That time there is no food. There is no food. And plain area we eat better food. In Nepal, makai, what is the cornflower, they very undeveloped area. Very undeveloped area. And they went to the foods. And there is a more caste. And Alambar, you know, if you go to Mahabharata, Alambar is a very brave people. Very brave people, and they are the army. They are working for the Gurkha army, called the Limbu, right? He's working for the Siba, you know, the like Alambar is the king of the Kiran. You know, that's the people. Is a very brave people, and they're professional killer. I sometimes told it is a very professional killer. They want to kill the people. Even in London, they came to a lot of people here. And they work only pork, you know, pork and meat. They don't like rice, nor they don't like vegetables, because they are very angry. You know, and they want to kill the people.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that particularly your contribution just prompted a couple of sort of memories. One of them was, I seem to remember somebody, a friend of mine from Barbados, I think it was from Barbados, saying that all their railway lines were taken up by the British war effort, and they never got them back again. So the other thing was, it also reminded me of a neighbour I had in the 70s who was Jamaican, and he said that during the war he was a dairyman, and a whole lot of them from Jamaica were sent to the south of the United States to do the work because troops are being called up. You know, people are being called up who've been dairymen. And he said, we went into this bar, whatever it was, and they said, we don't serve blacks, you know. And he said, we've got our British passports out and put them on the thing, said, look, you've got to serve us, you know. And he reckoned that, I don't know if he's right or not, you know, but he reckoned that that sort of stimulated the local population, you know, to stand up against the sort of Jim Crow. You know.
We've got Peter again wants to say anything. Anyone else would like to come in? Yep, please.
A quick point, really. Like, thanks for your contribution, Roshan. And I think that, you know, I definitely got an education myself, and I think that it would be really interesting to try to offer more meetings and places where people can learn about the resistance in Nepal and the left-wing groups, what they do and why they are important and effective, and how they organise and what they achieve, because I think it's completely cut out of what's presented to us in the media, and people, the popular knowledge of people is like, what is an alternative to this system, to imperialism? How do people resist? What do they look like? What do they do? So yeah, like maybe as an idea for a future event, it would be very useful to have some more coverage of that. So I think, like, again, on the left, it's like massively missing topic.
Thank you. Anyone else before I ask Peter? Yes, please.
Just a brief point. When I was reading, I came across this organisation which is called the National Indian Army. I don't know if you read it. But yeah, these were sort of, there were Sikhs and other Indians who fought for the British but were captured by the Japanese and the Germans, I think covering Malaysia and Japan. And they were actually given sort of freedom, and they said, you want to go and fight those who are colonising you. I don't know how well they've done or what actually happened. There's a lot of people who are still continuing to fight to the end. Organisation called Barbara Gully as well, I don't know if you've come across them as well.
Well, thanks for that. Yep, the Indian National Army and Bose, who was the leader of it, very fascinating, interesting story, incredible story. My grandfathers were inspired, I mean most Indians were inspired, who opposed the British by Bose and the Indian National Army. It's interesting as well that you raised the juxtaposition politically between the Indians, the Japanese, the Germans and the British and all of that. That requires another conversation, because it opens up a lot of interesting issues and contradictions that need to be explored as well. I mean, just on that, I always say that my maternal grandfather, I think, gave the best answer ever on this issue. He had very broken village dialect Hindi from a village from Haryana. And I said, Nanaji, I asked him in Hindi, and I can just about understand his Hindi. I've asked him when he was alive, back in the late 90s, when few visits he came to London. I said, Nanaji, what do you think of Hitler? And he goes, well, Hitler was a bad man because he bombed the Soviet Union, but he was a good man because he bombed the British. And I thought, well, that sums it up perfectly, really. I think that's a very balanced and correct appraisal from a literate man from the villages who fought the British, war veteran liberation struggle. But anyway, so I'm going to ask Marika and then Roshan to... sorry, Peter, you wanted to... Anyone else but Peter? Sorry, please, sister. Yeah. No, please, go on. We've had Peter already first. He's lucky I'm asking him again.
I appreciate that all the speakers who stood in West Africa and African countries you mentioned, all these are here, and thank you for your introduction.
Can't hear.
Sorry, thank you.
Stand up.
Sorry, and thank you for your introduction about not the involvement, but what happened to African soldiers as well and African people. But can there be a follow-up of a more nuanced discussion in specific countries and people about African people and African soldiers in terms of the British colonial army?
Yeah, no, thank you, sister. Definitely. I mean, Mustafa, he was just messaging me when we were talking. Our comrade from Mali. And he said he's done the research, so he wants to present it. He's back on the 25th of August. Okay. So perhaps you and I can discuss with the other colleagues, and we can make that event happen. Yeah. That's specific to the West African and the other wider African role in this situation. Because you're right, it's a miss, it's an absence, and Marika has given some of that. I think it'd be interesting perhaps to invite Marika back as well and to get Mustafa, perhaps other speakers.
Yeah.
And perhaps you'd like to be involved in that as well. So definitely thank you for that criticism. Peter? And
Yeah.
so anyone else? Sorry, before Peter, sorry, Peter, keep stopping me. Is there anyone else?
No. Don't forget the
Anybody
Irish.
want
I'm
Peter?
going to summarise.
Peter, please.
Don't forget the
Just
Irish.
very quickly, if you look up Doug Muller, he was a Gurkha who was on the right side. He was an officer in Iman who was hung by the British in 1914. He is one of the martyrs of the independence movement, and he was from Iman. But taking up the question just very quickly on why it is right to raise the campaign here. Oh, certainly because we're asked to by our comrades in Nepal. But there is another, and it's not. There is a difference, between the British squaddy and the Gurkha. They're all selling their goods, but the Gurkha regiment is a residue of empire. It's a leftover empire. It was a racist construct to begin with, and it still is. It still is. And when you hear the British talking about our gallant, the gallant British, it's condescension, and that's racism just as much as confrontation is, and saying someone's inferior. So I think it's important. It's not idealistic to take up the struggle against racism. It's a racist project. It's part of the working class has been infected. This whole country has been infected with racism because of the imperial legacy in the broadest sense. And the Gurkha regiment is just one of those residues that needs to be addressed. Yesterday, at the Japanese 90th victory, they had some actor at the end, and I'll just finish with this. He read out "Coming Back," "The Road to Mandalay" by Rudyard Kipling. "Coming back, ye British soldier, coming back to Mandalay." To think, the British did go back to Mandalay after Kipling wrote it, and they hung and assassinated Aung San and people who were allied with the communists and were fighting the British. They did go back, and to think that the British are still in this dream world. They can actually quote Kipling at a national meeting, and they can have this, this stuff about the Gurkhas, this sort of glorification of them. I think it's a racist thing, and it's for the good of the working class in this country. We don't wait for the revolution to tackle racism or racist projects. I think it's important for the British working class to take it up.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to ask first Roshan and Marika to give final comments, please.
Okay, I'll just be brief. The first one, the issue of mercenary, it's a good question. It's quite a common one. It's not, one reason I did emphasize it is partly in Britain, there's so much army propaganda about the Gurkhas. I mean, really. I lived and I went to university in Wales. Some of the first Gurkhas I saw when I was trekking in the Brecon Beacons after the Afghan war started. And there's so much, they're not this or that. So I emphasize that word to make the point. And it's slightly weird if you think about it. For 200 years, people from hill tribes in Nepal coming to Britain just take it as natural, it's normal, whatever, the Queen and all that kind of stuff. I want to emphasize that. The second point is the term is not necessarily my term. I mean, I'm pretty sure if we're all workers, working class, we've all done mercenary jobs, if you want to use that. That's true. But it's a term used in international relations and UN and in army kind of discourse already. It's also applied, there's debates about it, French Foreign Legion, private security, things like that. I would make a distinction. I mean, I myself went to Nepal during the People's War. Other former comrades, and not me, did want to fight, but we were told by the commanders, we don't need foreign fighters, we've got too many, we've got kids who can fight. What we need you to do propaganda work. I mean, my contribution was to teach the commanders how to use Google Maps. So, I don't know. So
don't give that away. That's not going on the final edit. The second one, to do with the work issues, that is the issue. That really is. It's the money, that kind of thing. But the thing is, in 200 years, it's not obvious at all that has really helped them. They need, the whole point about the Maoists, the revolution, was to change some things. There is, despite what people think, a lot of wealth in Nepal. Hydropower, there's all kind of herbs, there's many kinds of wealth in Nepal. But,
But I mean, I won't go into that. But none of this goes to the people. None of it is developed. Okay, if people want to change, they need to do that, not keep on selling. So the work issue is very important. The distinction between Comrade Anjana Bishanke's statement, someone I respect very much, is partly when the Maoists entered the peace process, okay, as usually happens, as you've all seen in Greece now, there's very, very hard negotiations with the imperialists, okay? All your demands, you have to, it's done very much. So that led to a split in the parties, and there's different views among different parties. Most of the Maoist leaders who I've spoken to, and I won't name names, but they're quite high-ranking, people in the assembly, and things like that. They all have said, we support you, but we can't at this moment talk about it, but we're waiting to do it in the future. They all, from every single party, Maoist party, said that. So it's an issue that will turn up again in the future, which is where we need to be when that turns up to also help them. Okay, so that's my main points. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. Marika?
All right, just very briefly, I want to emphasize the importance of propaganda, which I would call brainwashing in the British education system, here now and in the past in the colonies. And I think the effort goes on to maintain that brainwashing one way or the other, whether it's through computer programs or whatever it is. But I think that is very, very, very important. About recruitment and why people volunteered now in Africa and the Caribbean, there was compulsory registration for the military, various rules and regulations, but there were people who volunteered, both World War I and World War II. And the books that I've read say that they volunteered because the pay was better than you could get any pay doing any other kind of work. And very, very interestingly to me, when I was doing some teaching in the 1980s of courses that were being run here in London then for people who had left school without gaining even GCSEs, the equivalent of O and A levels, I was teaching those courses for Birkbeck College, so I had a number of people there who were ex-military. And when we had long discussions of, why are you now doing this course and how come you left the military so young? Well, without exception, they had all joined the military, no matter what their skin colour or ethnicity was, because there was no other work and because the pay was reasonable, and because it looked as if you might get some training in some kind of skills that you could use afterwards. But after a couple of years in the military, they had had enough. And perhaps most sadly, the black guys, whom I remember telling me that it was not too bad, the racial issues, while they were being trained here. But these guys were then sent over to Kenya, and they said the level of racism that then blew up among the whites towards the Kenyans, they just couldn't bear. So they all left as soon as they could, all these black guys, because they realized that for some reason the whites sort of accepted them while they were here, but that the underlying racism was incredibly strong. Which then takes me back to the propaganda and the level of racism that is propagated in our school curriculum till today, and that goes on, and that you must do something about. Please, those of you who have children, take up the issue with local schools. They have to begin teaching the history of the world. They have to look at the history of architecture, the history of science, the history of mathematics. We all learned from out there, it wasn't developed here. This is absolutely crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. So just before I close the event, just a few quick announcements. First of all, please make my life a little bit easier this evening. There's a red box there, just strategically placed next to the burfi, so sweeten your mouth before you put the £5 in that red box, if you don't mind. That'll just help cover all the costs. Just to let you know, the other events taking place during the Malcolm X Summer Festival is next Saturday at Brixton Library on Windrush Square. We have our special guest of honour for the Malcolm X Summer Festival, which is Eddie Conway. If you don't know, Eddie Conway was a leader of the Black Panthers in Baltimore in the 60s and 70s. Unfortunately, and I just cannot fathom it. I mean, I was very blessed to meet Robert King, who spent over 3 decades in solitary confinement in Angola prison in Louisiana. You meet this comrade, you wouldn't think he spent a night in a cell. He's such a beautiful man, just incredible depth of personality and soul. And so my father spent 3 years in solitary in Punjab, but someone spending 44 years as the price to pay, which many of the black revolutionaries did of that period, is incredible, and it's a real honour to have him here. And he'll be speaking at Brixton Library with Minka Adolfo, who's I think everyone knows Minka Adolfo, one of the coordinators of the United Friends and Family campaign, former member of the Black Unity Freedom Party, and he'll be speaking about that tradition of struggle as well. So that's next Saturday, 6 p.m. at Brixton Library. And then we have an event on Eritrea. And if you don't know, Eritrea is being subjected to imperialist onslaught at the moment for being an independent African country that refuses Western NGOs, refuses Western aid on principle, and for that it's being cajoled and attacked in a very manipulated, sophisticated strategy, including by the British. And one of the great darlings of the left, who there's a lot of hype about at the moment, don't want to mention names, but unfortunately supported the early day motion against Eritrea. So maybe that's another little constructive criticism we need to raise with some of our English lefty friends, perhaps. But there's an event on Eritrea about culture and resistance. There'll be free Eritrean coffee ritual there. There'll be Eritrean music and culture. We have a special guest again from Brussels, from Ethiopia via Brussels, Mohammed Hassan, who's a great revolutionary mind and researcher and revolutionary, who's going to come and speak about Eritrea. We'll have Eritrean comrades there. That's Saturday, 5th of September at the Bush Theatre in Shepherd's Bush at 4 o'clock. And then we have Remembering Claudia Jones on this year, which is her 100th birthday anniversary, that we recruited 12 young people, some of which Marika very kindly had a research session with. 12 young, mostly, all but one actually, young women who are presenting their research findings of our Claudia Jones research project, which is a project Malcolm X movement has been rolling out last couple of months. And they'll be presenting their findings on Claudia Jones and presenting at the Black Cultural Archives on Saturday, the 12th of September at 6:30. And the next day, on Rich Mix, Sunday, the 13th September, the big party to finish off the Malcolm X Summer Festival. We've got Bugs in the Attic performing, Nala Dankwa, who works with different activists. Aki Nawaz from Fundamental will be there. And that event is just celebrating Black and Asian musical resistance in this country over the decades as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for attending. It's a really important conversation. I'm really happy that we've taken an initiative to push this out. There's other little initiatives, but this is one of the kind of uncompromisingly anti-imperialist type, a decolonial anti-imperialist approach to the issue. We will be taking the sisters' criticism definitely on board, and hopefully you can participate with us to delivering another event on the same subject, this time focusing on Africa, which is important as well.
I'm sorry, also the Caribbean. Sorry.
Yeah, the Caribbean as well. Absolutely, absolutely. That's very important as well.
Like the conversation we have today in that.
Absolutely, sister. Totally agree. Do finish the burfi and the namkeen and the juice on the side, and please do leave your money. And if you want to get involved, please do talk to myself. Sorry, Sister Pamela. Yes.
All the events mentioned, are they on that Facebook website?
Yeah, they're on. We're doing individual Facebook event pages for each individual event, but in the about section, all the events are listed. So thank you anyway, and thanks for coming.